At sunrise on Memorial Day, the eastern sky glowed soft amber, the kind of light that touches even concrete with reverence. Red Hill Base stood still, its gates casting long shadows onto the dew-wet pavement. The air smelled of metal, pine, and coming heat. I approached the security checkpoint with measured steps. 84 years old now, and every year pressed into my bones like old letters folded too many times. My cane tapped a steady rhythm. In my left hand, I carried 3 envelopes. 2 white, 1 yellowed by 4 decades of time, the postmark barely visible, 1983, Fort Detrick. That one always seemed to weigh the most. My clothes were clean, pressed khakis, crisp shirt tucked in, a jacket whose threads had outlived most of the men who once wore it beside me. I'd never changed the patch on the right shoulder. Some things aren't meant to be updated. The younger guard was first to notice me. Junior Sergeant Hank Doyle, late 20s, good haircut, lean frame, the kind of man who stands tall when he's not quite sure if he should be laughing. He took my military ID and turned it over in his palm like it was counterfeit. He squinted at the expiration date, then at the seal, then back at me. "You sure this is real, sir?" he asked, smiling in that way people do when they think they're being gentle. "This thing's older than my dad." The second guard, a lanky kid with mirrored sunglasses, leaned over from his stool. "Hey Doyle, check the mail. Might be a relic in there." They both laughed. The kind that comes easy when you don't recognize what stands in front of you. Doyle waved the ID toward the scanner, which of course blinked red. "Not valid, sir. This ID doesn't scan." "And these envelopes?" He peered closer at the yellow one, his brow lifting in mock confusion. "Has your mail been delayed for 40 years? The laughter came again, fuller this time. I stood still, let it pass through me like weather. I didn't explain the letters, didn't mention the sealed orders or the line item marked unclassified, only upon death. Didn't speak of the men whose names lived inside them, men who'd burned alive while I dragged others out, back in the summer of '83. Instead, I nodded once, turned away, and walked back down the road, the same slow cadence, each step heavy but even. Behind me, the guards kept laughing. I didn't look back. They would forget me by lunch. But I never forgot anyone. Not one of them. Not after 40 years. Not ever. You don't wake up one morning and decide to vanish. It happens slowly. Year after year, you trade visibility for clarity, noise for silence. That's what the work required. My name is Wesley Carter, retired colonel, Army Intelligence, 84 years old. There's a reason no base welcomes you back after you've spent decades in the shadows. You don't belong in the photos. Your name doesn't line a wall. You're the margin that moved. I was stationed in 61 countries across 30 years, assigned under 5 presidents, under different titles that all meant the same thing: find out what can't be known, and do it without leaving footprints. I kept nothing but the stories in my head and a lockbox in my basement filled with sealed orders no one was supposed to see. My clearance was Tier 5 with a need-to-know caveat so narrow only 2 people at Langley ever knew my full record. In 1983, I was stationed off-grid at Red Hill. The assignment was labeled Fuel Logistics and Infrastructure, but we were running something deeper: experimental transit channels, classified asset protection, testing whether rapid response teams could extract operatives from chemical zones under fire. Then came the explosion. The fire started in Fuel Depot C. Reports say it was a faulty igniter. That's not what happened. A containment breach triggered the secondary line. Most of the enlisted were outside the range, but 3 soldiers, good ones, were inside. They should have been evacuated. I was given the order to stand down. Asset exposure too high. Containment protocol authorized. But you don't leave your men in there. I disobeyed. Went in once. Pulled out Corporal Dumas. Second time, I found Sergeant Brinks, badly burned, couldn't walk. I carried him back myself. The third time, the fire was already licking the ceiling tiles. I still went. Pulled Ruiz out by his jacket. But by then it was too late. The pressure tank went off behind us. I hit the floor and watched the fire take him back. I wrote 3 letters that night. My hand was shaking. One for Brink's mother, one for Ruiz's sister, and one to myself. A confession, of sorts. That envelope has never left my side. I was debriefed in silence, my actions sealed under Directive 220B. They called it, exceeding command parameters. I called it staying human. The army buried the incident. No medals, no commendation, just silence. I stayed quiet because I thought it would be temporary, that someday the names would be listed, that the dead would be acknowledged. But it never came. Not in 84, not in 94, not when I retired in 99. They disappeared in the record, as if they'd never worn the uniform. So I began writing letters, one every Memorial Day, sealed them, addressed them, never mailed them. I wrote them for Ruiz, for Brinks, for McCall, who wasn't in the fire but died 2 weeks later from exposure we were ordered not to report. The silence around their deaths was a wound that never scabbed. For years, I walked this quiet line between memory and duty, until today. Today, I carried the 3 letters in my pocket. 2 addressed to ghosts. 1 addressed to a name forgotten by the system. Mine. I didn't come to Red Hill for permission. I came to lay those letters where their names should have been all along. But the gate didn't open. And the laughter behind me was the reminder. Time doesn't just move forward, it buries things. And if you're not careful, it buries you. I walked away with my dignity intact. But only just. Because deep down, I wasn't sure if anyone still cared. If anyone in there still remembered the fire. Or the men who went back in. The sun climbed higher behind me, casting long shadows down the stretch of road as I walked away from Red Hill's gate. My cane tapped against uneven concrete. The envelopes shifted in my pocket, creasing softly with each step. I didn't rush. Let them laugh. What they saw was an old man with a stiff leg and a pocket full of paper. A relic. They used the word out loud. The base had changed since I'd last stood on its threshold. Sleek new security systems, young guards in pressed uniforms, eyes that scanned but didn't see. Junior Sergeant Hank Doyle's voice still echoed in my ears. "Hey, old man, has your mail been delayed for 40 years? The second guard, faceless behind mirrored shades, had called the envelope a relic. A word tossed off without weight. They didn't know what they were handling. Not the ID, not the envelope, not the man. When I turned away, Doyle mimicked my walk behind my back. Slow, exaggerated, his friends laughing as he dragged his foot and swung an invisible cane like a stage prop. "Make way for the museum exhibit," he called out. I heard the words but didn't turn. Because there's a dignity in restraint. And because I've seen men like that before, young, certain, armored by ignorance. I reached the sidewalk just outside the base and sat on a short stone wall, the same one I used to lean against in 83 between shifts. I opened my thermos, drank a little water. The sun warmed my face, and for a while I just sat still, quiet, waiting. That's when I noticed someone watching. From inside the gatehouse, partially obscured by the glass, stood a younger guard. Brown skin, buzzed haircut, eyes focused, not mocking, not laughing, just watching. Still. Private Miguel Reyes. I'd learn his name later. He didn't join in. When Doyle made his jokes, Reyes kept still, his gaze fixed on me the way a man looks at something he doesn't yet understand but knows not to dismiss. Something in my bearing, maybe. Or the jacket. Or maybe the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't beg for attention, but holds it. Reyes looked like he was thinking. The way his hand paused above the radio on his belt. He didn't speak, didn't move, just considered. The same way a man considers whether a story he's heard all his life has left something out. He reminded me of another young man, decades back, in Panama. My first field assignment. That boy's name was Arturo. He'd carried classified packets through jungle terrain without losing a single one. When I asked him why he kept the straps tied so tight to his back, he said, "Sir, what I carry matters more than I do." That's what I saw in Reyes. The potential to carry something without knowing its weight, until the day he did. He wouldn't act yet, but I knew he'd remember. Inside the mess hall, maybe 50 yards from the gate, an older woman paused over her oatmeal. The guard's laughter had carried through the window. Her name was Annie Keene, civilian staff supervisor, food service. Silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. No uniform, but she'd been around long enough to remember the real ones. She glanced toward the sound, and froze. The jacket. Her eyes locked on the jacket I wore, the left sleeve slightly darker than the right from years of folding. She stood there, ladle in one hand, eyes narrowing, memory turning behind them. She knew that jacket. Red Hill, 1983. Fuel depot explosion. She'd been a young kitchen tech then, 22, barely out of training. She remembered the chaos, the smoke, the alarms, the names shouted over the intercom. And she remembered one man. Blood on his collar, hands burned, jacket charred. Sitting against a wall outside the triage unit with 3 letters in his lap and his eyes closed. She never knew his name. Until now. She looked at the guards. Boys she'd fed. Boys who didn't know enough yet to be ashamed of what they'd said. Annie didn't speak, didn't reprimand. She walked to the back, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old photograph. Grainy, yellow. 6 soldiers kneeling in front of a supply truck. In the center, a man with a cane resting against his knee and that same jacket on his shoulders. Me. She placed the photo on the staff bulletin board. Didn't say a word. Someone else did. One of the younger cooks asked, "Who's that?" Annie's voice was quiet but firm. "Somebody you should know." An hour later, someone snapped a photo of me sitting outside the gate. Didn't say who. Might have been Reyes. Might have been Annie. Doesn't matter. The photo made its way to the internal base network, a secure board used for base alerts, ID verifications, and shift updates. One caption: "Unknown retired officer. Attempted access. Turned away." But the right eyes saw it. Not Doyle. Not his friends. They were busy with lunch and laughter. They'd already moved on. But others hadn't. A ripple had started. And ripples, if they're deep enough, turn into waves. The photograph wasn't dramatic. Just an old man in a chair of stone, back straight, jacket folded neat, eyes ahead. But something about it, maybe the way my hands rested over the cane, or the thin yellow envelope poking from my pocket, spoke louder than any caption could. It started as a simple security log entry. Then someone, maybe Reyes, maybe Annie, tagged it with one word: why. That word got attention. Red Hill's internal system wasn't meant for questions. It was built for clearance, logistics, surveillance reports. But why has weight. It echoes. Within the hour, that photo appeared on 3 desks it wasn't meant to reach. The first belonged to Major Lorne, Public Affairs. He flagged it, scanned the ID badge I'd handed Doyle, and ran it through the restricted archive. Denied. Error 0022. Access classified under Directive 220B. He leaned back in his chair. 220B was rare. Legacy intelligence protocols. Off-the-books operations. Cold War theater clearance. Lorne hadn't seen one flagged since 2007. And never at Red Hill. He picked up the phone. Across the base, Corporal Emma Dawes, Tech Liaison for Veteran Access Systems, received the call. She pulled up the image, enhanced it, focused on the ID badge number. Not a match. But then she cross-referenced the serial against old pre-digitized entries and found a paper trail buried deep. W. Carter, Colonel, INTSV 04. Status: retired. Record: seal. She didn't know who I was, not really. But she knew enough to know I wasn't just another walk-on. That same hour, Private Miguel Reyes made a phone call of his own. Quiet, discreet. His cousin, Joaquin, worked as a civilian contractor in the Pentagon Archives Division. They talked once a month, mostly about football and their uncle's diabetes. But today was different. There was this guy at the gate, Miguel said. Old-timer. Real quiet. Didn't make a scene, but something about him. The jacket, the way he stood. One of the guards laughed at him. I couldn't. You get a name? Joaquin asked. Carter. Wesley Carter. The line went quiet. Then Joaquin said, "Spell it." Miguel did. "I'll call you back in an hour." It took less than that. Joaquin called a friend in records integrity. Used a favor he'd been holding on to since last year. When he called Miguel back, his voice had changed. "You were right to notice him." "Why?" "I can't give you details," Joaquin said. "But that man, he was someone." "Still is," Miguel replied. Across the base, in a maintenance office tucked behind the supply depot, Annie Keene stared at the old photo she'd posted. The jacket, the way the man's eyes seemed to look past the camera. It hit her like a shock to the ribs. He'd been there that night, the night the tank went up. She'd never known the full story. Only rumors. Fuel breach. 2 dead. Maybe more. One man had gone back in, they said, even after being ordered to evacuate. She remembered a soldier's face, charred and quiet, kneeling in the mess hall after midnight with a gauze-wrapped hand and blood on his collar. No name on his badge, just the jacket. She was 22 then. Now she was 62. She pulled out a drawer beneath her desk. Inside, a faded article clipped from a local paper in 1983. Unidentified hero saves lives in Red Hill explosion. No photo, just a quote from an unnamed private. He didn't wait. He just ran in, carried 2 men out. The memory had stayed with her, not in the headlines, in her gut. She posted the article next to the photo on the board. Quietly, no announcement. That evening, the post reached Lieutenant Colonel Sean Dupree of Special Operations Legacy Command. He didn't get it from an alert. He got it from a text, a blurred copy of the image, followed by a message from a former associate. Is this him? Dupree opened the encrypted line and scanned the image. The posture, the eyes, the envelope. Then he checked the date. Memorial Day. A call was placed to Colonel Martin Davis, head of Legacy Command. Sir, Dupree said, I think Carter's surfaced. He showed up at Red Hill this morning. Was denied access. There was a long silence on the other end. Doyle? Davis asked. Yes, sir. I'll handle it. 7 minutes later, a call from Colonel Davis rang through to the Red Hill security office. The line was direct, unmistakable. The duty officer transferred it to Doyle's station. Junior Sergeant Doyle. This is Colonel Davis. Put me on speaker. Doyle obeyed. The voice that came through wasn't loud, but it was precise. Every syllable clipped, deliberate. The man you mocked at the gate is Colonel Wesley Carter, retired. His record is sealed under Directive 220B. That envelope he carried holds a directive more honorable than any order you've ever received. He once extracted 6 hostages from East Berlin without firing a shot. He's been honored by 3 presidents, all off the record. Doyle's mouth opened. No words came out. You will treat him accordingly, Davis continued. Stand by for arrival of a response unit. Full honors protocol. That is not a request. That is an order. Click. No more laughter now. Just the humming silence of consequence. And the faint sound of boots moving toward the main gate. It started with the sound of gravel shifting beneath tires. A black SUV, government issue, matte finish, no markings, pulled up to the Red Hill gate with purpose. It didn't slow for the ID scan. It didn't need to. The guard at the window snapped to attention before the door even opened. Colonel Grant stepped out. He wore his uniform like it was built onto him. No medals, no pageantry. Just 4 rows of service on his chest and a face carved by discipline. His boots touched the pavement like a dropped anchor. The guards who had laughed were still at their posts. Grant didn't look at them. Where is he? He asked. Doyle, pale now, pointed down the road. Sir, he walked away. Colonel Grant didn't acknowledge the stumble. Radio the perimeter. I want his location within 2 minutes. Send a detail to escort him. He does not walk in alone. Doyle reached for his comm. Grant turned to the second guard, the one who'd called the envelope a relic. You're dismissed, pending further review. The guard's lips parted, a protest forming. Grant didn't wait to hear it. Inside the security office, an air of silence replaced the earlier smugness. Screens glowed with status updates. One showed an old man sitting on a bench just past the east path, still and waiting. Sir, we have visual on Colonel Carter, Reyes reported. He's resting about 300 meters southeast. Prepare gate honors, Grant said. You will all stand when he enters. Doyle swallowed hard. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers approached me from the side path. They didn't speak until they were within 3 feet. Colonel Carter, one said, we've come to escort you in, sir. I nodded, said nothing, rose slowly. My knees gave a familiar creak. One officer stepped forward instinctively to offer a hand, then paused. I waved him off. I walked unaided. As we neared the gate, the tone of the bass changed. It was subtle at first. A few heads turned. The mess hall went silent as men stood to peer out the window. Outside the barracks, a platoon drill paused. Soldiers removed their caps. Then we passed the checkpoint. Doyle and the others stood at attention. No words, no apologies, just silence, held in place by the weight of shame. I didn't glance at them. Didn't need to. The past doesn't ask for vengeance. It asks for memory. Colonel Grant met me just inside. Sir, he said, saluting me. Red Hill welcomes you home. I returned the salute. He turned beside me. May I walk with you? Of course, I said. We walked in silence down the corridor that led toward the courtyard. A few young soldiers moved to the walls as we passed, standing at rigid attention. I heard someone whisper, "That's him," followed by a stillness that swallowed the space whole. The memorial courtyard was ahead, an open-air stone enclosure surrounded by names, etched in brass and granite, lined with small flags that waved lightly in the morning wind. I hadn't been here since 1991. Nothing had changed, except me. I stepped onto the flagstones alone. Colonel Grant fell behind. The crowd had already gathered, unannounced, unplanned. Soldiers in uniform, civilian staff, even a few retirees. Annie stood at the edge of the mess hall doors, hands folded. Miguel Reyes stood a few feet behind Doyle, eyes solemn, posture respectful. No one spoke. I walked to the wall. The same 3 names missing. I reached into my jacket, took out the 2 white envelopes, laid them on the base of the memorial, side by side, beneath the blank panel where their names never appeared. Then I knelt, slowly, gently, my left hand on the stone. My right hand withdrew the final envelope, the yellowed one, the 1983 postmark now almost unreadable. I placed it between the others. It wasn't addressed, just marked with one line in my own handwriting. If I ever return, let the truth return with me. Behind me, a voice called out, "Colonel on deck." The words cracked like a rifle shot. Uniformed men and women across the courtyard snapped to attention. Salutes rose in perfect unison. Even the civilians stood taller. No one moved. No one breathed. I stayed kneeling. There was no need for ceremony beyond this. Eventually, I rose again. My hands were steady now. The tremor had gone. The burden, light. Colonel Grant stepped forward. "Sir, if you'd follow me." He led me back toward the main gate. But as we reached the stone archway, I noticed something different. A plaque, new, just affixed, bronze still gleaming. It read, "The Wesley Carter Gate." For those we almost didn't see. I stopped, let the words settle. Corporal Jace Morgan, part of base operations, stood beside the plaque. He looked young, too young to understand the Cold War, too young to remember anything but this century. But his eyes held reverence. He approached me cautiously. "Sir, I found something earlier, tucked behind the stone base. Might have been wedged in for years." He held out a document protector. Inside, the 1983 envelope. The real one. Unofficial order. 5 names. 5 medals. Never delivered. Suppressed due to the operation's secrecy. Also inside, a handwritten memo. My own, long forgot. They died serving. The least we can do is remember. Colonel Grant turned to the crowd. As of this day, June 25th, Red Hill Base officially acknowledges and awards posthumous commendation to the 5 soldiers lost in Operation Tether, 1983. A murmur moved through the courtyard. Not applause, not cheer, just quiet breath. Like a held truth finally released. The silence meant everything. They asked if I wanted a chair. I declined. My legs ached, but I stood. At the edge of the memorial courtyard, framed by brass and memory, I faced the recruits lined in formation. A company of them, nearly 80 strong. Young faces, some still with the dust of their first field march clinging to their boots. None of them had known the names I carried. None had read the reports that were never written. But now, they knew. Colonel Grant had sent word, full protocol, honors included. They didn't question it. The corridor leading into the courtyard filled with uniforms. Rank faded into stillness. There were generals here, sergeants, civilian staff, mess cooks in aprons, techs in maintenance grays. They all lined the walls without order or command, only presence. At precisely 1,300 hours, the bugler began. It was not taps. It was a slow procession. An honor cadence designed for fallen whose names were once denied. For the ones almost erased. I walked again. No cane. The pain in my hips still burned, but my posture held. One step at a time through the corridor, the recruits standing stiff as marble. As I passed, they turned, slowly, precisely, to face me. No salute. Not yet. Just recognition. At the far end of the corridor stood the wall again. Names etched deep into granite and steel. I approached the blank panel, where no names had ever been. The space was reserved for special entries, campaigns unlisted, details sensitive. It had always been bare. Until now, a temporary insert had been added. Clear acrylic with 5 names printed in solemn black ink. Sergeant Mark Brinks, Corporal Jonah Ruiz, Private Ethan McCall, Specialist Darren Lutz, Technical Sergeant James Voigt. Below the names, a 6th line, Red Hill Fuel Depot Fire, 1983. Record declassified June 25, 2025. I touched the names, my fingers trembling just slightly now. Then I knelt again. From my pocket, I withdrew the final envelope, folded, nearly disintegrating, the seal broken from decades of travel inside one jacket. Inside was the copy of the order that had never reached command. 5 commendations, marked, for file only. I placed it beneath the panel. Then I stood. A silence so complete followed that even the wind had stilled. Behind me, Colonel Grant called out the order. Render honors. 80 hands moved in practiced unison. 80 salutes raised as one. For a moment, I was not 84. I was 29 again, kneeling beside Ruiz's body, hearing the creak of flames and the roar of propane behind steel. I was 33, standing before an intelligence review panel, told I'd acted with unauthorized autonomy. I was 40, reading the obituary of a soldier whose service never officially existed. I was 61, cleaning a shoebox full of letters I could not send. And now, I was seen. As I turned from the wall, the recruits held their salute until I passed. One of them, a young woman, barely out of high school, met my gaze. Her eyes didn't waver. She saluted with a crispness that belonged to something deeper than regulation. Colonel Grant walked with me back toward the main gate. "You've given them something today," he said. I nodded. "Not me. Brinks, Ruiz, McCall. They gave everything." I just remembered. At the entrance, the plaque still gleamed. The Wesley Carter Gate. For those we almost didn't see. It would stay there now. A reminder carved not for me, but for every man and woman who bore their service in silence, who never demanded to be known, but deserved it all the same. Before I left, I turned once more toward the base. Recruits were dispersing, but I could still see Miguel Reyes standing apart, his eyes following me. He didn't wave, didn't smile, he just nodded, and that was enough. The next morning, the new recruits at Red Hill would find a revised handbook waiting on their bunks. Page 3. History section. It listed the Red Hill fire of 1983. It listed the 5 names. And in small, bold text beneath it, "Let this serve as a reminder that not all battles are visible. Not all heroes are known in their time." Somewhere deep in the base archive, a file long marked "Unconfirmed" was updated. Status: Verify. Commendation delivered. A note was added by Colonel Grant. Colonel Wesley Carter, retired. Legacy, confirmed. Outside the gates, I kept walking. Each step steady. No longer carrying silence. Only memory. Some men return from war with ribbons. Others return with silence. Wesley Carter returned with names. Not his own, but the names of the ones who never made it back. Who were left out of reports, left off of plaques, left behind in memory until someone finally said, enough. He didn't ask for vindication, never wrote a memoir, never raised his voice. He showed up. That morning, at Red Hill Base, he reminded the living what it means to carry the dead with honor. Not through ceremony, but through return, through presence, through the quiet act of remembering when everyone else had forgot. The truth wasn't restored by protests or petitions. It was restored by a man who had kept faith long after the world stopped watching. The plaque at Red Hill stands still. Brass turned gold in the late afternoon sun. Recruits pass beneath it every day now. Some slow their steps. Some stop to read. A few leave notes at the wall when no one is looking. Sometimes just initials. Sometimes folded paper. They understand something that doesn't come from rank or orders. They understand that history has cracks, that names fall through, and that remembering them is not an obligation. It's a choice. In the end, Wesley Carter didn't ask for recognition. He asked for accuracy. And when the day came, it was not his salute that mattered. It was the ones returned to him. Because dignity asks for nothing, but it leaves everything behind.